Thank you, Sean. Hello, everyone. Yeah, welcome to sunny Spain, where it's actually sunny for once in Galicia. And today, the next 20 minutes, hopefully no more than 20 minutes, we will be talking about closes, and we'll be answering three main questions: what, when, and how. I think that's probably all we'll have time for. So, to begin with, a very simple question. What is a close? Could you type your answers in the chat box, please? No, Sean, that's close with an S. We're talking about the Z here this time. Okay. So Tatiana's going for similar to fill in the blank, but the students don't have any options. Okay. They're all coming up with similar answers at the moment. And to give you some help, shall we say, see if this gives you any ideas. What do you think the missing spaces might be? Okay. What about this? Do you want to change any of the answers that you've just come up with? Okay. So, this is the definition given by the Macmillan Dictionary, which I think we kind of got most of them. I mean, Cara went for weather as opposed to that. And this is one of the things we'll actually look at in a little while about what a close can be good for. But as you'll have seen, I gave you two different types of close with a definition. Was one easier to follow than the other, or were they both fairly similar? Okay. Because, I mean, those are two different types of close. The first one, let's see if I can go back. The first one, it was just every fifth word was removed. Whereas in the second one, I removed all examples of a type of word. Can anyone tell me what type of words were removed from the second one? Exactly, Carol. All the nouns were removed from the second one. And we're going to look at why that's important in a little while. But I think when thinking of closes, there's one question that I think comes up quite a lot, and I mean, this is the question, because a close is, like you said, we're filling in gaps, but is a close a gap fill? And I have to admit that before I started researching this talk, and when I kind of wrote the blurb for the conference, I actually called a close a gap fill. I have since learnt the error of my ways, because whilst in a close you are filling in gaps, there is a difference. The difference kind of depends. I mean, it's got different levels, and we can get into a lot of detail. We can get into not a lot of detail. But the main thing for us to think about in today's talk is that with a close, we're looking at the understanding of the overall understanding of the whole text. Whereas with a gap fill, we're kind of looking at a linguistic level. We're looking at understanding of a language point or a particular type of concept. So that's the main difference to bear in mind today, that close is overall understanding and a gap fill is more individual language points, shall we say. But there's one person who says it probably better than I could, and that is Scott Thornbury, where he included this in his A to Z of ELT. And you could say, well, in the example I gave you, I took away all the nouns. Is that not a gap fill? But there's a difference between taking away all the nouns and taking away particular nouns, or, nouns of, I don't know, places in a town, for example. You're kind of focusing down to a very particular language point as opposed to all nouns or all verbs. But if we go back to the two closes I showed you, I chose those two types for a particular reason, and that's because they're the most commonly used closes, shall we say. The first one, I removed every fifth word, and that's what we call the fixed ratio close. And that's when you remove every X amount of words. That X can be whatever you want it to be. For example, according to Hughes, it's every seventh word, but according to Harmer, it's between every fifth and every 10th word. According to Thornbury, it's every fifth, sixth, and seventh word. So really, you can take away whatever word you like. It's a fixed ratio, but we fix the ratio, we as teachers. And the other one was what they call the variable ratio, and that's where you remove all types of a word family, be it nouns or verbs or adjectives or modal verbs or whatever you want to. And that's the what. Quickly moving on to the when, and this is where my cat picture comes in, because I have to get a cat picture in somewhere. When should we use a cloze? Traditionally, closes first came about in the 1950s, and it was to measure reading comprehension, global reading comprehension. And it was actually introduced in mother tongue language tests first of all, and then introduced into the foreign language afterwards. And that's when it kind of segued into the grammar as well. Whether it's better to use it for reading text or grammar text, just Google it. I mean, there are hundreds of articles as to why, and in the 14 or 13 minutes I've got left, we haven't got enough time to go into it. But what I will say is, in terms of our classrooms, the most common way that our students meet closes is in a Cambridge exam, be it for a certificate or PET or whatever. And there it is actually looking at understanding in terms of grammatical understanding. So if that's how our students use it, maybe that's how we should also look at it. But I don't want to pigeonhole us too much, because I think both reading or grammar is equally useful. And we're now going to look at the hows with my little carpenter friend there. And what we're going to look at are some different sites that we can use to make closes. Because obviously, the traditional way, we can get a piece of paper, we can get it, photocopy an article, print out an article, get our Tipp-Ex out, Tipp-Ex it out, and, everyone's happy. But we want to save the environment a bit, save the trees. So we can look at a way to do it online, which is also a lot less work for us, which I think as teachers we all like to make our lives a little bit easier. So I'm going to introduce you to 4 different sites. The first one, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's a pretty old site. It's been around for as long as I can remember, at least. But the reason it's still around is because it's a good one. It's very simple to use. We just find the text we want to send to a close, we copy it and paste it into the box there. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can actually see it will analyze your text for you. And if you want, it will kind of make the gaps, depending on if you want articles removed or prepositions or whatever you want removed. And you can have, for example, it can be an interactive one where your students can fill it in online, or it will bring up a static text which you can then copy and paste and put into any worksheet that you want to go into. The next site, Learning Apps, is this one you need to create an account for. And I should actually say this is a gap fill, not a close that I've got here, but it was what I had to hand when I was taking my screenshots. With Learning Apps, you do need to create an account, but it's free. But because you create the account, it means it will then keep all the tests that you make and you can use again and again. And this will be an interactive one where you can send students a link, or you can display it on an interactive whiteboard in the classroom and students can come up and type it in. You can, as you can see here, you can actually set a task to appear on the screen to tell you what you want them to do. And you can also include feedback, so you can give them clues or hints or, good job, whatever you want it to say. Our next site is Wiser. Wiser is another one where you need to create an account. With this one, there's 2 types of account you can create. There's a free account or a paid account. I don't have the paid account. They've introduced it in the past year. But the free account does all you could possibly want it to do. It, in terms of personalizing it. It has lots of templates. You can make it as pretty as you like, as many different colors as you like, which I particularly like. And you can, not only can you create the worksheet, you can then share it with your students online, which means that you can either give each student an individual link, or you can send the whole class a link and they can register, or they can log in with their own name. But what's really good about that is you can then track your students' progress. So when they finish the worksheet, you will have a record of it. You'll know how long they took. You'll see what score they got. For example, I don't know how well you can see this, but it'll kind of give you the list of all your students' names, the amount they got. And what's good about that is once you set it for your Teams 5 class or whatever, they've completed it, and then you can then send them feedback having looked at their results all through the site. Because if they register, if they have their own individual access, they have to log in with their email account, and then it will then send it to their email account. So that is Wiser. And the final one I introduce you to is Analyze My Writing. And this is multi-purpose. In terms of the Cloze, there's 3 different types of Cloze option that it will offer you. You will type or copy your text into it, and then it will automatically remove every X word, every 5th, 6th, whatever word you want. It will let you choose which individual words you want to remove, or it will automatically make blanks out of 20%, 30%, however much of the text you want it to be. But what I also like about this site for higher levels, say for your C1, your C2, your students can actually analyze their writing. Because if you look at the other options to the left of the Cloze button, they can type in their writing they've submitted to you, and it'll give you them the basic text statistics, for example, how many words, the punctuation. And I think the punctuation is quite useful because, for example, here in Spain, even at a high level, lots of my students will hand me in a text which has maybe 3 full stops in the whole 200 words or something. So by actually making them aware of, how little, how few full stops, or how many sentences they've not used, basically, it's useful for them to see their writing. Common words, it looks at the word frequency. So if you're trying to encourage your students not to not to repeat all the words, if it says, you used but 5 times, you can say, okay, what other ways are there to say but, for example? And the lexical density also looks at, for example, the word types and how many percentage of nouns to adjectives, for example. So those are the 4 sites. I recommend, just check them out, see which one works best for you. I would say that I tend to use Wiser the most out of all of them, but they all work slightly differently. And what we're going to look at now is how we can bring this into the classroom. And I will say that here I'm looking less at how we can use a Cloze test maybe for a grammatical point or to review grammar, and looking at more at bringing it down to the students' level so they can get a clearer understanding of what's involved. And the first way we can use it is actually handing it over to the students, getting our students to create the Cloze test themselves. And there are different ways they can do this. We can go back to paper and pen, or we can just give them one of the sites, give them the George site, which is the free one without an account. They can choose an article, they can then copy it in, and they can choose the gaps. Why might we want to do this? Lots of different reasons. For example, it can be done at home. You can set it as homework, and then they can bring it into class, or email it to you, and you can print it out and use it in class, and that will be, your warm or your first activity of the next class. It also it helps them to get a clearer perception of how the text is organized. Because if they're thinking about what words do they want to remove, then you're thinking, well, if I remove this word, will someone still guess it? You start looking there, the different collocations, and do if it's an auxiliary verb, well, what does that auxiliary verb follow? And they're starting to analyze the text, hopefully, in a more detailed way. And the third point I think is quite important because they're becoming more familiar with the actual task type as well. So they can put themselves in the examiner's position and think how the task is created. It will help them to actually then complete the task because they're more familiar with what is expected. And Hughes also, or I would say Hughes agrees with me, but I agree with Hughes in this, that, they need to become familiar with the technique, and sure, they can practice it and do it over and over again, or they can create their own and get more into the thinking behind the Cloze test. And it takes it away from us. If they're creating it at home, we just have to check it and print it out. But if we do want to take more of an active role in the cloze creation, we can create the closes, but instead of going to the Guardian or going to the BBC and taking an article, we could use our students' own writing. And I'm sure all of your students handling writing tasks, be it if they're doing an exam class or not, they have an exam task, they have a writing task they have to do. And I think if we can then get them to analyse that a little bit more, but without saying, okay, we're going to analyse your writing now, turn it into a cloze, and they kind of, it's more accessible to them because it's something written by them at their level, but you're turning it almost into an exam, so you've got the two parts coming together. Why might you want to do that? There's various different reasons why, but I think one thing to remember is if you are using their writing, wait a while. Don't have them hand in the writing on the Monday, and on the Wednesday you give them a cloze test with that writing, because you kind of want them to almost forget what they've written, because if it's fresh in their minds, they will know what they put in the gap. If you wait a couple of weeks so they don't remember, they won't necessarily recognise it as their own writing. And then, what you can do is you put them together in groups. I wouldn't necessarily give them the whole text, maybe give them a paragraph or something, and turn it into a cloze test, and then let them analyse it. For example, what I put here is different versions to provide different answers. If you've got 4 pairs, they each have the same cloze test, chances are they will all come up with different answers. There might be, 3 different ways that you can proceed whatever the word was. And that's when you can start looking at why. Are all those answers acceptable? Well, those 2, yes, but this one, the third one, doesn't collocate with that noun. So it brings you into a language discussion. To explain that a little bit better, this is, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is an example I did with my proficiency class a few weeks back. They'd written an essay on education, so I paired them up. In text A, it was every 5th word was removed from the 2 texts. In text B, I removed the verbs in the first part and then the nouns in the second part. And that kind of really led to lots of different discussions because they all had different answers, and most of them were valid. So it brought in a discussion on the text and all sorts of things as to why yes, why no. And then when I told them actually it was their text, like one of them, she said, I think you made, this was a reading text or something, so I kind of recognise it. And I was like, no, it was your writing that you gave me 2-3 weeks ago. And they kind of like, oh, really? We wrote like that? And they were really surprised, and they really liked it. And then when we started analysing the text a little bit more and saying, well, what you wrote was right, but it was written this way and that way, it kind of made it more memorable for them and a bit more, hopefully more relevant as well. But yeah, I know my time is running out, and those were my ideas. So just before I go, there's a couple more links of other ways you can use closes and more information about the difference between a close and a gap fill, because like I said, 20 minutes wouldn't even go there. But that's pretty much it from me. I'm actually within my 20 minutes. So thank you very much, guys. Any questions, feel free to email me or put them in the chat box. I'll be around for a couple more minutes before I rush over to do the Russian session. I don't speak Russian, but that'll be fun. So
thank you, Emma. That was an impressive piece of timing. Very well done. Very impressed with that.